So I'm excited to have Jason Lantier on. He is the CEO from Path to Potential, which is an organization that provides ABA services to children and adults, both in-home and virtually. So I'm excited to have him on today. We've got a number of questions to ask him. I know parents are going to be very intrigued and love to hear just kind of his perspective on ABA and some other things that we're going to talk about as well. And I think you'll get a lot of valuable information from Jason today. So maybe we'll get started, Jason, first by just kind of asking you how you got started in autism. Like what led you to pick a career helping children and individuals on the autism spectrum?
Well, my story is kind of interesting because I actually started when I went to grad school at Queens College in Queens, New York, and I actually started working at a residential treatment facility with adults. So unlike most people that work with children, I started with 40 and older as a direct care staff. So I started working there, and then I worked with children probably a year later at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. So I kind of started with the end in mind, in the sense of I saw how valuable it was to learn these skills at an early age, because when individuals got older, it was a little more challenging. As we all know with our own behaviors, we get kind of set into our habits. Mm-hmm. So when I started working with younger individuals, I already kind of had in mind what skills were so important to teach young children. But I even think before that, I started just as someone who was very curious and always asked a lot of questions. And even I struggled a little bit with learning. So I felt in my younger years. So when I realized that I kind of had to adjust the way that I learned to meet, my needs, it made me a better teacher, because I never thought, okay, they can't learn. I said, how do I have to adjust the material to reach this child or to reach this individual, this adult, teenager, etc.
Okay, I love that. We know that early intervention is just so important with children. And I love that you've worked with both children, but as well as adults, and been able to say, hey, these are the things that children need to know earlier on or be worked with so that it can help them into their adult years. So a lot of parents, especially some who follow the magazine or follow our Instagram page, don't necessarily know about all the different types of therapies. And I know we're not going to get into all the different types of therapies out there, but can you give us a brief rundown of what is the difference between ABA, BCBA, occupational, speech therapy, all the kind of different therapies within that realm?
Okay, well, I'm briefly going to start with the latter ones that were suggested. So speech therapy is kind of, as stated, it focuses on language, communication, socialization. It also encompasses eating therapy, but it actually goes deeper into the overall physiology of the mouth, the throat, and the way it all works together to produce sounds. So it's a more in-depth as far as language goes. Whereas occupational therapy typically teaches skills, kind of like the name states, not necessarily occupation just for career, but ones that you could utilize for everyday life. Mm-hmm. But a lot often in schools, or in the field, we know it for teaching fine motor coordination. They also cover the areas of sensory integration and different things involved sensory processing. And all of our parents out there and practitioners, we know how relevant that is to our young individuals with autism, because there's a big sensory component. So we often work in tandem with one another. Mm-hmm. Okay, and now ABA kind of utilizes all different aspects of all these different fields. We apply behavioral principles to real life situations. So they essentially took these principles that were proven in a laboratory and said, can we apply these to meaningful situations outside of the laboratory? And we commonly know this, obviously, for working with children or young adults with autism, but this has been proven. There's been studies published where colleges have taught improved tackling on a college football team, or improved just a variety of tasks. So it just has to do with the application of behavioral principles and then measuring the performance. So you're able to not just state, I see improvement, but you're actually able to show with data, with carefully recording objective behavior. And then that's really what separates it. So it's not so much the areas that we go into as much as it is how we go about training and how we go about recording and showing that our procedures are effective. And I think that's the most important part of applied behavior analysis.
Okay. I love that explanation. I think it really kind of outlines it clearly for parents. Oftentimes it's very polarized right now. When you hear about ABA, you hear, some parents love it and it's done so much for their children. And then others say it's absolutely horrible. And can you just speak to that? Because I think it's really important for parents, caregivers, all of us to be educated in all the different types of therapies and different things that can help our children. And I know that, every child is different, every family is different, but can you speak to that polarization and what people are seeing with ABA that way?
Yeah, I've seen this feedback quite a bit, and I've been a little taken back by it because I have not experienced anything that would garner that type of response. However, what I think it is there's a saying, the only thing more dangerous than knowing nothing about something is knowing a little bit about something. And certain practitioners may apply a certain aspect, specifically something called discrete trial training. And this is where you're sitting at a table and you're kind of repetitively teaching tasks. It's very effective, and then it's followed by reinforcement, which could be an edible, could be a preferred item, but it's done in such a robotic, repetitive way that it could appear just a bit too strict and too harsh.
Okay.
And if someone doesn't understand the overall global concept of applied behavior analysis and just utilize this one tool, it would be like a karate instructor just having someone do one kick hundreds of times and the child's foot hurts. And you're saying karate is horrible. And karate may be horrible, may not be. I'm not a karate person, but I'm just saying if you kind of just utilize one aspect of it and you don't cover kind of all the great things that it's capable of. And as I said, it could be used for literally any skill that could be broken down into components. You could teach salsa dancing if you break it down into steps, have reinforcement, motivation after you're done. You go out for a preferred food item, and that's how diverse it can be applied. So I think that unfortunately it got kind of put into a little aspect of it was kind of overused. I don't think there was any malcontent, or at least I would say that generally, but I think that's where the bad reputation comes from. But
Okay.
I always tell anyone, if they've had that experience, that they think it's abusive, they should report it and let people know, like observe, maybe this person isn't properly trained.
Yeah.
So that's just something that I wanted to cover.
And I think that that goes with anything, right? There's going to be better practitioners in some areas than in others, and even with the doctors themselves as well. And so you want to look for those that align with your values, align with what you're looking for with your child. And if you have a bad experience, you're probably not the only one. And maybe to seek somebody else out, because they're probably all you're not going to experience that the same at every practitioner for sure. So you said that you deal with children now, but you've dealt with adults. So ABA is for both children and adults. Is that correct? Because I always think of it just for children.
The thing is applied behavior analysis. Let's just get into the basic concept. What happens before the behavior and after the behavior governs the behavior. So I'm going to say that if you park at a certain spot because you want to go into 7-Eleven and get the quickest spot, and you get a parking ticket, as a result, you're less likely to park in that spot. That's an example of a behavioral situation that has occurred. So behavior is what we all experience. So it can be utilized, as I said, literally on a college football team with typical, or what quote unquote typical individuals. So we can use it with adults. It's showed effective with individuals with Alzheimer's. So even with the elderly population. With the adolescents, it's most commonly known to be used with children. And I think children in general are more malleable.
Yeah.
so they can be a little more effective, but that's not, I don't have any data that necessarily shows that that is the truth. So I think it's something that everyone should realize really could be utilized on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I add it to every aspect of my life. When I work out in the morning, I write every single thing I do down. I collect data. I see where I'm going. When I do my to-do list, I do something called behavioral momentum, which is I do 2 easy tasks followed by a challenging one to create momentum to get my to-do list done. So I'm applying applied behavior analysis to my everyday life. So that's just showing its diversity and how it can be used. That's where, we can't just think of this small aspect and overgeneralize that. So
Wow. That is so intriguing. I've never thought about necessarily using ABA for myself, and now just like having a desire to look into it based on your description. I've never heard it put that way. So
try the to-do test. Say, email this person,
yeah.
text this person, and then write a report, something challenging. Because once you have momentum,
Mm-hmm.
and they call that behavioral momentum or high probability, low probability procedure. So it's just an aspect of how diverse and how helpful this science can be for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So you work with a lot of autistic children. What are the biggest challenges that you see when people come into your clinic, or you do virtual ABA as well?
Well, the whole thing is this. We try not to undermine any problem, because everyone who comes in, we have to look at, this is where they come in. We have to prioritize, where they're at, their baseline level of performance. However, we have to prioritize anything where it's causing harm to the individual or causing harm to another person. This might entail aggression, elopement, which is kind of a term for when you're running away from the person you're with, staff or a caregiver, self-injurious behavior. These are prioritized due to the nature of them.
Yeah.
But language, communication, socialization, dealing with the autism population, that's commonly the ones that are prioritized.
Mm-hmm.
As well, stimulatory behavior, because anyone who's worked with a young individual with autism, they've battled the barbershop and they've battled the dentist.
Yeah.
Those are the big summits that you have to climb as a clinician and as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the battles, and also food, because of this hypersensitivity to or how sensitive they are to certain stimulation. When they're eating food, the texture can be so aversive. So these are common problems that, of course, there is a spectrum of how problematic it is to the individual's life,
Mm-hmm.
but we try not to say, oh, that's a small problem, that's a big problem. We treat each case by case. This is where you're starting. Our goal is just to keep bringing you on your path to reach your potential.
So what are some of the basic strategies that you do? So you encounter some of these problems, or if you want to give an example, what are some of the strategies that you do to help that behavior change?
Okay, first and foremost, I just use the term baseline. Baseline is, where is the individual at when they first come in? Just because we have to see, to monitor progress, we have to get an idea of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Commonly used ones that people know of are positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is, after a certain desirable behavior occurs, we would elicit a consequence that would make that behavior more likely to occur.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you're doing a good IGTV interview today, so your boss gives you a $300 bonus.
Yeah.
It makes you more likely that you're going to give these type of interviews because of that positive reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Other commonly used ones are things like something called a task analysis. A task analysis is where we take an activity and we break it down into steps, measurable steps.
Mm-hmm.
An example would be brushing your teeth. It seems very dynamic, but if you actually break brushing your teeth down into steps, it might be 25 steps between opening it, what side of the teeth to brush.
Yeah.
But for us to measure something and kind of see which step the individual is struggling with, and I'm saying individual because I don't want to just keep saying child.
Yeah.
I'm saying it can be for anybody. But a task analysis is a key step that we use. And it's also good because it's something that we could help the parents learn, so then they could teach different skills. Because once you've mastered on toothbrushing, you could do it for making your bed. You could do it for making breakfast in the morning. You could do it for getting ready for the evening. Those are some skills that we kind of prioritize. And I mentioned before discrete trial training kind of with a negative connotation, but it really is a very positive thing if it's used correctly. And that's just essentially creating specific opportunities to teach a skill. So if I wanted you to teach you to say a certain word, we'll say it in a different language, I would use something called the SD, discriminative stimulus, that would elicit the response. You would say the response, and if you said it correct, you get a reinforcer. But we would have you do it multiple times in a row. After you've mastered that, we'd move on to another one. The most important thing is we're showing that we've mastered it, and then we maintain those skills.
Okay.
So these are a few, as I said, there's many, and it also depends on the individual. But let me just state one thing. I think as important as what we do to teach skills, it's also teaching people how to identify what's reinforcing a behavior maybe that they don't want to happen. So for example, you go to Target, and every time your child wants a specific toy, they throw a tantrum, they fall to the floor, and they have a problem. As a result, it's kind of, I'm not saying embarrassing, but it creates a lot of negative or attention that you're not necessarily seeking. So you buy the toy, you have another child with you, you have food, you're just trying to get out of there. Then you end up reinforcing the child for that tantrum. So we teach the parents to identify this, to break that habit, because it starts, they've learned tantrum equals toy. So I think it's as much about teaching skills as teaching to identify what is controlling the behavior in the first place, so we could start putting a behavioral protocol in place.
Okay, so we have a question that came up while you were talking about that. Someone asked, how do you deal with aggression during a meltdown? So I love your advice for identifying what is creating, that aggression or that meltdown. Can we ask what would be the next steps to take after you've identified that? So they're melting down. You're not going to give in because you know that that's just going to, create it over and over again. What do you do next?
Okay, so a key point is you have to diagnose it correctly. Much like anything else, before someone gives you any medical remedy, you want to make sure that you've addressed it. You could use something called a motivational assessment scale, MAS. You could look it up. You could Google it and find it, and make sure that you have the function of the behavior down. So in the example I gave, the function was tangible.
Okay, yeah.
So in that situation, we would not allow them access to that reinforcer giving that behavior. So we would block, that would be called extinction. We wouldn't reinforce that behavior. Depending on the level of the behavior, we may do things like systematically desensitizing them to bring them to that location, and then reinforcing them for spending 1 minute in Target without having a tantrum. And then we build up their tolerance, and we teach them, look, you're getting reinforced for not exhibiting that behavior. That's called differential reinforcement. So the most important thing is what I said first, it's the diagnosis. Yeah. And that's what the motivational assessment scales show, because you'll often see people say attention. Oh, it's for attention, with no analysis. And the problem is, let's say a child is bullying somebody so they can get lunch money because they want lunch money. If I improperly diagnose that and say that's attention seeking, and I just turn my head and ignore the child, he's still getting bullied. His lunch money is still being taken because I've falsely assumed that it was for attention. And I think that, so for this, the person that's online, sorry, I don't know your name. Yeah, I would say if you're working with a clinician, look at the function of it, and from there, work on making sure you're not reinforcing it, A, and B, start differentially reinforcing it. So when they're exhibiting behavior other than that, that's when you're starting to reinforce them with some other desirable item.
Okay. Okay.
So it's a little bit of a complex question, but I promise you the first part of getting the diagnosis is number one.
Okay. Awesome. And I noticed that on your website, Jason, you talk about the importance of parents being involved in their child's therapy. This is actually something that we very much value at the magazine. Like, our magazine is for active and engaged parents. We don't really believe in, just dropping your child off, and that's fine. In circumstances, you have to do that. But learning what you need to know so that you can then incorporate these things in the home, because you care the most about your children. You are the most invested in their, potential and growth. You need to have access to that information to be able to continue that learning process at home, because you also spend the most time with your children. And so can you just talk to us a little bit about how your parent training works and why it's so important for parents to be involved in their child's therapy?
Well, as you kind of touched on, it compounds the effectiveness of the treatment. Much like if you're getting guitar lessons twice a week for 30 minutes,
Yeah.
if you went home and then you're practicing 2 hours a night on top of the sessions, because your mother is also having you work on your language skills during dinner. So before they pass you the drink, you're having to say water, you're getting more repetitions. So it's compounding the effectiveness of the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing is, I always say a good parent trainer is like a good personal trainer. I mean, everyone could Google what's a good workout. Here,
Mm-hmm.
if they just hand it to you, but you have to get buy-in. You have to create enthusiasm, because parents are going through a lot. I mean, if they have multiple children, if they're picking up their child, bringing them to speech, OT, PT, if they're working another job. So I think it's about, first and foremost, teaching them that, first, be kind to yourself. And, when you start working with your clinician, take on goals that are reasonable for you to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the therapists get you involved in the treatment, you have a little more excitement. Because I think one of the problems with parent training is, if we come and we put too much demands on it, it's almost like a personal trainer. If you go there and you dread seeing them, because
Yeah.
they've asked you to do so much and they make you feel guilty if you don't do it. And in reality, it's a lot on a lot of these parents. However, to ultimately get the best results, it's they learn what the therapists are doing, much
Mm-hmm.
like the guitar teacher analogy. So we're increasing the effectiveness of the therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, and it's not funny is the wrong word, but due to COVID, I mean, my prayers go out to all the parents, because it's been very, very stressful for a lot of families. But there's always was it silver lining? I've seen parents become such effective therapists, to the point they're at the skill level of almost a trained therapist. As I watch them on television, on Zoom, or different types of telehealth, I've observed that, parents have really kind of been forced to become technicians and therapists, which
Mm-hmm.
is excellent, and they're learning therapy more. It's challenging as they're trying to, manage their jobs and just, get through this difficult time period for all of us. But I think that's one of the things that I really noticed, that, parents are really becoming more effective, and you're seeing it because they understand why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we can't just outsource, like my landscaper. I hire someone. It would be nice if we could. Unfortunately, with autism, we want to get maximal results. We don't want to settle for anything less than the moon. Shoot for the moon, and if we fail, we land amongst the stars. And that's what I would say, because I've seen so many things that parents said, oh, that's not possible. And we can't put those limitations on it. I think that, you really will see some amazing results if you just don't put those limitations on. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of my opinion on that matter.
Yeah, and being an actively engaged parent in your child's therapy will make all the difference in the world for your child. And you're right, it's interesting to see that with so much therapy going on over Zoom with COVID, that parents are really having to learn these techniques and to implement them into the home and see a difference with their child. Now, I'm going to scroll through and see if we missed any other questions, but I wanted to ask you, Jason, you have a non-for-profit that helps families who can't afford services. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. We started Angels for Autism, the number 4, because we were seeing countless families coming in that either had Medicaid that we weren't able to provide services with in our area, or they had such a high deductible or their copays were so high that they were turning down declining services. And some of these children were the ones that needed services the most. So we essentially decided to start a nonprofit, with no paid employees. The whole thing is 100% for altruistic purposes, that these families can get the services that they need, because we were seeing way too many families declining services. Or for Christmas, we donated 20 iPads to PS 469X in the Bronx, and we were giving children, the ability to communicate for the holidays. Like, what's better than that? And we're really just trying to, where our business, well, it is, we were doing a home therapy business, and we saw this big hole, and there was just too many families that we couldn't provide services for, that we said, we have to do something about this, because I just didn't feel right about the families that, some of them that needed it the most were either declining it because of $10,000 deductible or an $85 a day copay. So we're just trying to take it into our own hands, and we have some exciting things coming up with that. So
that's exciting. So what is it called again? And I'll link it after the IGTV.
Angels, like angels in the sky, the number 4, autism.
Okay, perfect. And are there any requirements for it? I think we had a question about, for older children, that I think this individual has one that's 26 years old and maybe needs some help or some services beyond their finances. So
we currently don't have an age restriction. We're going to put, I guess, at some point, but right now we're kind of putting people on the list based on their need level.
okay.
We're trying to help the families that need it the most. We're not putting people in the front of the line. We're saying, okay, if it's dangerous, if the child's in danger, if we'll say it's a single family home with no siblings, depending on the amount of support they have, we're trying to come up with a system that basically is saying, let's help the families that need it the most. And, age is right now not something that we're as concerned with as it is who needs the services the most. And yeah, we're having another project coming up in April 28th. We're doing another school in the South Bronx where we have a big time, we partnered up with somebody, I can't officially say it yet, but we're getting a whole bunch of clothing and iPads delivered to this school. And that wasn't our focus, but it was more about how do we give resources to these families while we build it up. And then we create like a scholarship program for families that really need the services that are not getting it through their private insurance. So that's something that we really feel good about, because we know it's something that's needed.
Yeah.
After we have hundreds and hundreds of families that we've had to, I can't say turn away, but there's no way around it. So we're taking it to our own hands and just doing everything we can.
That's incredible. Thank you for doing that, especially, for the autism community. It's hard. It's hard to get, so I'm based in Canada. We have people in the magazine that work all over, including the US, but even in Canada, the wait lists are ridiculously long here, even though it's free healthcare, right? And so it's incredible that you're able to give them access, even though they might not have the finances to do so, or I'm not sure, I'm guessing wait lists are kind of long out there as well.
Well, that's what we're starting with. We're starting to gain traction by doing projects, because for us to get to grow, we have to show a track record that we set out projects, we can accomplish them. And that's why we started with some schools that were really struggling with devices. So we said, this is a small, plausible project that we can make a little dent on our need as we go into the sponsor a child type programs and, some different exciting things like that are in the future, but they're pretty close. But yeah, no, definitely reach out to us on the website, angelsforautism.org. And, we'll go from there. But
Perfect. So I think I've got all of the questions here, Jason. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'll wrap up and let everybody know how to get connected with you guys. If you could give one piece of advice to parents just starting out on their autism journey, what would it be?
Okay, first and foremost, pat yourself on the back because you started the journey. You
Hmm.
took the first step. Like, be kind to yourself. Pat yourself on the back. You did the first step. Then you start where you are. Don't compare yourself to other children. Don't.
Oh,
So we look at our neighbor's house and all of a sudden we feel bad about. We have to look at where is our child now, and then step by step see the improvement. That doesn't mean set limitations on them. Let's get away from the comparison game and let's focus on what is the next step for my child. Get a team that cares about them and judge for a good team. Nothing is get a good support group,
yeah.
whether it's online. You have to realize you're not alone. I think it's important because I think it's overwhelming. And I think that when parents are talking about, oh, they're going to college, and then you feel a little down and depressed, and you have to realize it's like there's a community of people that could empathize with you and also share different, I would say tricks of the trade, but different ways to access resources and stuff like that. So I think that that would be my number one thing. Just get around people that know your struggle, know what you're going through,
Hmm.
and just really like recognize you took the first step in doing this, and it's a lot of work.
Hmm.
And inch by inch, everything's a cinch. So I think that's the key. You got to go up by small little milestones and just don't the comparison game. Because one day you could have a yacht. You look to the guy next to you, he has a bigger yacht, and you feel depressed. So I think the point is, it's like, this is your situation, your
Hmm.
child's struggle. Everyone has their own individual situation. And, you know, I've seen, dynamic things. And when people say, oh, but so-and-so is doing, I'm like, you can't look at so-and-so because you don't know what's happening behind their doors. You don't know what other challenges they have. So I think that that's something I really would focus just on anyone in general, because, when we compare it to anything, that's like the secret to suffering. So let's just avoid that and focus on what our children need, and we'll get there.
Definitely. That joy goes away as soon as you start to compare yourself to someone else. And as a parent, we need to
Exactly.
give ourselves more grace.
Rather than saying, look, I have accomplished this much at the gym. I've accomplished this much in school. But if
Hmm.
I look at my cousin who went to Harvard, all of a sudden I'm like, my
Yeah,
degree doesn't look that good.
very,
So that's
very
my
true. Well,
story.
thank you so much, Jason. I've enjoyed all of your advice. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed it as well. And we'll post it on our IGTV. We'll connect to all your links and everything. So for those of you that want to follow Path to Potential, they are P to Potential on Instagram, Angels for Autism on Instagram as well. Their website is pathtopotential.org, and they provide ABA services for children and adults virtually and in person. So thank you again, Jason, for hopping on. And is there any last words you wanted to share?
No, my pleasure, everyone. Honestly, let's keep our heads up. Let's work together. Reach out to us if you have any questions, about anything. We have a lot of good people that have a lot of resources, and we genuinely, if one day we were independently, we would be doing this for free. This is what we love, whether it's helping out, so just reach out to us with whatever you need, and we'll try to help in any way we can.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jason. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care,
All right,
everyone.
you too.